Hey there kids, it's me, Mrcreepypasta, and before we get started on tonight's story, I wanted to tell you about Good and Evil, Light and Dark, and the Grey Mists in Between. It's a book by Caedmon Holland, the author of tonight's story, and you can get it right now on Amazon and from Barnes & Noble. Link is down below. The axe finally managed to break through the large oaken door, enveloping me in more heat from the inside of the flaming inferno that used to be a large manor house. Black smoke already pouring out from any opening in the structure that had been created by the raging flames, cascaded over me and my crew. And I once again thank God for the sealed mask and air pack on my back. Even though my vision was clouded, I raised the axe again and continued my chopping at the door. Now that I managed to finally put a large crack in it, it only took a few more desperate swings, and the door was splintered enough to allow us to enter the home. Normally, for a fire this large, we would have concentrated more on damage control. There was no way we could save the house. And our efforts would be focused on making sure the fire didn't spread, and no one, including us firefighters, would get hurt. However, this situation was different. We knew people were home. The number of cars parked in front of the house proved this, yet the neighbors who called us said that they hadn't seen anyone exit the place since the fire began. And what was worse, the family who owned the place had a 6-year-old girl named Mary. Almost everyone in town knew Mary. She was such a sweet and friendly soul. Any charitable events that we had held for any reason, she wanted to be there to help. I personally have received many of her homemade cookies she'd bring by the fire station to thank us for just being firefighters. Didn't matter if they were any good or not. Her cute smile and the bright demeanor while she delivered them made everyone's day. Imagining such a preciously little girl somewhere in this hellscape, frightened and hurt, added an extra strength to every swing of my axe, and I knew that every other member of this crew felt the same way to save her as I did. As soon as the door finally broke down, we all rushed in, keeping to our training, but with the added surge of adrenaline to try and rescue as many as we could. Though the spirit was willing, our flesh was almost too weak. Inside the home, the heat was far worse than anything I'd ever experienced. The smoke, much more blinding and choking and thick. It was a swirling, hot mass of light and darkness that threatened to envelop and overwhelm anyone who encountered it. It seemed impossible that anyone could still be alive in this place. But we still had hope, and we had a job to do. Team Alpha, we're going to check upstairs. Team Bravo, you're going to clear the ground floor, and Team Charlie, head to the basement and check for civilians. Our lieutenant's voice rang over my ears only seconds after the 9 of us had entered. I answered back over my handset with a Team Charlie, copy on headed to basement to check for civilians, and along with my teammates Johnson and Roberts, prepared for our team's descent into the basement. Not one of the 3 of us were happy to have to go to a basement. I mean, sure, heat and fire rises, but the basement usually has no way out other than a single staircase, and if the house falls on top of itself, being in the lowest level was a sure death. Still, it had to be done, and we had each other for support. We reached the door that led to the basement and found it locked. I put my trusty axe to use again, and the door was broken down in 10 seconds. It was like a dam had broken, and even more black smoke poured up from the bottom. This let us know the fire probably originated from down there, and there was probably not a single living soul in the basement. But we had to check on the small chance that someone was. Even though we were nearly blind, we made our way down through the encompassing darkness. When we reached the bottom floor, all 3 of us had a feeling that something was wrong. Not like a structure on fire has anything right about it, but the circumstances were all different from anything we'd ever seen or heard about before. Though smoke was still flooding through the staircase, not a single speck of it touched the main road that we found ourselves in. It was like a glass wall was keeping the black vapor only in the vicinity of the staircase. Also, the fire that covered the floors, walls, and ceiling seemed off. I've never seen flames so red, and they were only red. The fire can burn as many different colors, but it never burns just one color. Yet the 3 of us were surrounded in a room of red that seemed to devour any other color aside from the black smoke. We only stared around in awe for a moment before our training kicked in and we set to work searching for survivors. It turned out the basement was far bigger than we had thought. In fact, it was so big we decided that we had to split up to search for people. It was dangerous to do that, but time was a major factor here. Even more so for poor souls that still were alive down there. I ended up going down a long hallway that ended up in decent-sized rooms that looked like a workout room. Glancing around, even with my mask on, I could tell there was no one in the room. I was just about to leave when a glint in the fire caught my eye. There was an iron door built into the wall, seemingly cut into the stone that made up the rest of the basement walls. It didn't look to be made out of traditional iron, but something black and twisted gave off a very off-putting aura around it. I didn't want to have to go near the thing, but I knew that I had to, just to make sure. As I approached, sounds from beyond the abhorrent thing other than the crackling of fire reached my ears. Screams, crying, and moaning. On instinct, I rushed to the door, trying to find a way to open it. It looked like the glint that caught my eye earlier was a large doorknob that had some sort of gemstone encrusted into it. The knob was that of a clawed demonic hand, clasping a ruby, and looking at it brought a bad taste to my mouth. I didn't want to waste any more time looking at the door, however. I was more concentrating on how to get past it to the people behind it. I knew my axe would be useless, so before I potentially injured myself ramming into the door, I decided to try the knob. The heat I felt on my hand was more powerful than anything I'd ever felt before in my life, even with a protective glove. What I did was obviously stupid and against everything I'd ever been taught to do, but hearing the chorus of suffering in the space beyond the door made me desperate and foolish, thinking of others before my own safety. Of course, that's a stupid way to do stuff because if I get injured, I wouldn't be in any position to help anyone. Miraculously, the knob turned and the door swung open on its own. I began to hurriedly enter the room, preparing to direct as many people as I could to safety. I managed to take 2 steps in before I froze in place. Though I was surrounded by fire that burned hotter than anything I'd ever felt before, my blood ran ice cold in my veins at the sight before me. Silhouetted in the red glow of the unnatural fire that ringed me in the rooms were bodies. They were charred. So much their twisted black skeletons were the only things remaining of them. Yet to the horror of my disbelieving eyes, these bodies, though only burnt bones remained, were not dead. They flailed about on the ground, writhing and screaming in agony. Hands, wreathed in flames, tore at themselves, as if they were trying to grab the fire that covered their very bones and tear them off of them. Others scrambled and scratched at the floor and walls in desperate attempt to search for an escape from the enveloping blaze that smothered them. Lungs, vocal cords, and tongues had been burnt to ash, yet I could hear their wails and tormented cries. Some managed to form words, crying for mercy and forgiveness, but most just let loose with pitiful shrieks, pooling together to make their choir of suffering and misery. And then I saw Mary. She was sitting, curled up into a ball on some flaming table or altar, around about 30 feet from me. Her left side was facing me, and by some miracle, she was completely untouched by the fire around her. She was wearing a lily-white dress, with her knees up, her arms hugging them, and her face buried into them. From the movement of her brown hair and shoulders, I could tell she was crying. I couldn't blame her. Everything about the situation I was in vanished from my mind. And my only thought was to get her, carry her in my arms, and bring her out of this hell. I began to make my way over to Mary, but as my heavy boots made contact with the ground, she somehow heard me from across the room. Slowly, she lifted her head to face me, and the absolute terror of what lay before me stopped me immediately. Her left side of her face was normal enough. Green eyes, red and swollen from crying. Pale cheek, stained with tears. Part of her mouth quivering from a sob. But her right side was a completely blackened skull. And inhuman. Her right eye socket. It wasn't empty, but had a fiery orb, the same color as the fire in the basement. In fact, it seemed like that eye was the source of the fire, as the hellish fire fell like tears from it, her teeth on the right side of her mouth, visible because there was no lip or cheek to cover them, was long and sharp like those of some vicious predator. No hair was left on the right side of her burnt scalp, but protruding from her forehead was a wicked curved horn. The thing that had once been Mary hissed something to me. And through the cacophony of burning wood and stone, through the orchestra of anguish from the dozens of bodies around me, I heard it. Go. You cannot save her, no matter how you try. My foot instinctively took a step backward. But my eyes then focused on Mary's human face, full of pain and torment and despair. I wanted to stay. I wanted to take her out of this place. But something in my very soul held me back. I somehow knew that if any of those infernal flames touched me, my fate would be the same as those that littered the ground around me. So I did as the thing that the devil that was not Mary commanded. I ran away. Out in the hallway, I practically collided into Johnson and Roberts. I told them I hadn't discovered anyone. And together we made our way up and out of the basement. Neither of the other two teams had found anyone, and once we were all outside, our trucks began pumping water to douse the flames. It took longer than any other house fire we'd faced. And right before the final embers inside flickered out, a loud, long groan echoed through the night air. With a crash, the house fell in on itself, which explained the hair-raising sound we'd all heard before the home's destruction. Only I knew the sound wasn't from any structure or thing from this earth. No bodies were found, not even bones. Detective work really isn't my thing, but a buddy of mine from the precinct later told me that a bar that after investigating all the people who the cars belonged to, they'd found some pretty disturbing stuff. Every single one was from somewhere all across the United States. All had one thing in common. Cultists. All of them. When local police investigated their abandoned houses, they all had weird statues, symbols, evidence of grisly sacrifices, all of it littering the place. I guess they all got what they wanted, or at least what they deserved in the end. All of them, except for Mary, I expect. Now, they teach you a lot of things when you train to be a firefighter. But to this day, every time I stare at my right hand, a burned imprint of that clawed, demonic hand forever scarred into my palm. I think about the one thing they don't teach you. What to do in case of hellfire. Hey there kids, it's me, Mrcreepypasta, and I just want to tell you thank you so much for watching, or listening to, or however you happen to get it, tonight's story. If you take a look in the description down below, you're going to find the link back to the author of tonight's story on Reddit, or on Creepypasta.com, or their respective website. We don't just get stories from one particular place, we get them from all over, which means that if you have a story you want me to read, you can always send it over to me at mrcreepypasta@gmail.com. And especially if you have a book that you want to be able to promote, to go along with that, send me over a link to that as well, because I'm always down to help promote authors and their books, like you'll see at the beginning of some of the videos. And a very special thank you to everybody on that Patreon, patreon.com/MrCreepypasta, especially Ariel Torres, Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Ken Lando Higuchi, Brianna Van Tine-Janzen, Chompski, TheRedOakShieldVirus, Sindee Barney, Asia, G. Weevil 3, Diana Kraus, Stephen VanHuss, Tristain Pelton, Nico, kaeo, TheGingerBroz, Dante Rowe, Raphael Rodriguez, Don Meulmeester, Eliminator 86, SteampunkSinner, Kaleb Dougal, Sky Harbor, The Homeless Bird 93, Gabrielle Undefined, Bobby Carmen, Liam Newman, Aaron Stormcrow, Bobby Jean Torgan, Dr. Strawberry, The Wormhole, Barbara Macedo, and Vic. Thank you guys so much, and if anyone would like to join them on that list, head over to patreon.com/Mrcreepypasta. Here's hoping that you guys are loving the horror as much as I am. And sweet dreams.